Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something you see everywhere, yet, well, it's often misunderstood. Plastic.
Specifically, we're looking at this big shift, this transformation happening from, the traditional fossil-based stuff to bio-based alternatives.
And it's not just about the material science, is it? There's this huge challenge around rebuilding public trust in the materials we use every single day.
Exactly. And this deep dive actually draws from a masterclass held as part of the Be Trust project.
Ah, yes, B-Trust. They're funded by the EU's Horizon Europe program, right?
That's the one. Their whole goal is basically to figure out how we can develop a really transparent, inclusive way of governing these new technologies.
To overcome that public distrust, and also the hesitation you sometimes see from industry itself when it comes to adopting big biotech innovations.
Spot on. Because the potential is there. These bio-based materials, they could be key for the green transition, for the circular economy.
If people trust them, consumers, stakeholders, everyone involved.
Precisely. So that's our mission today, really. How do we get these promising materials from the lab bench to, well, to being accepted and used in reality?
Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, I think we have to start with the big picture, the whole system, because the scale of change we're talking about is just enormous.
Right.
We were looking at insights from Alexander Röder. He's from Plastics Europe. That's the industry association for the raw material producers.
And what's their take? Do they see the writing on the wall for traditional plastics?
They definitely acknowledge the problems. The current linear model, make, use, dispose it, creates massive issues with waste, with carbon emissions. They get that.
So the industry actually supports moving towards a more circular, climate-neutral system.
Yes, they do. And their main strategy for kind of weaning themselves off crude oil is using alternative feedstocks.
Like responsibly sourced bio-based materials.
Exactly. Things derived from plants or waste streams instead of fossil fuels. But shifting an entire global infrastructure that's been built around oil for decades, that's not simple. No kidding. It sounds incredibly complex.
And this is where we hit a really key technical concept, one that's essential if this transition is going to happen at scale. It's called mass balance attribution.
Okay, hold on. Mass balance attribution sounds a bit like creative accounting. For the listener, break this down. What is mass balance? Well, think of it like this. Producers have these huge existing plants. Mass balance lets them mix, say, bio-based feedstocks in with their normal fossil feedstocks at the beginning of the process.
Okay.
Then they use a verified accounting method to track how much renewable input went in, and they can attribute that proportion to a certain amount of the final plastic output.
So the specific plastic pellets coming out might not be like 100% physically made from the bio stuff, but the company can still sell them as bio-attributed and claim the climate benefit.
Essentially, yes.
Isn't that just greenwashing with extra steps? How is that real change? It feels a bit shaky.
That is the critical question, and it goes right to the heart of the trust issue. Look, the reality is we can't just flick a switch and change every plastics plant overnight.
Right. The infrastructure challenge is immense.
So mass balance is seen as a vital tool, a kind of bridge, to allow the industry to start integrating bio-based inputs now, using the existing kit, and actually reduce fossil fuel dependence at scale.
Okay, I see the argument for it being a necessary transitional tool, but wow, the need for transparency must be absolute. If that accounting isn't rock solid and easily understood, poof, trust is gone.
Totally. And the language doesn't help either. Alexander Röder pointed out that the term bio-based itself causes a lot of confusion.
Yeah, I can see that. People hear bio and think, what? Organic? Degradable?
Exactly. Many assume bio-based automatically means biodegradable, which just isn't true for lots of durable plastics. Or they think it's always better for the environment, which, again, depends on how it's sourced, manufactured, disposed of.
It depends, the classic sustainability answer.
It often does.
Right.
So the solution has to involve clear standards and consistent labeling. Plastics. Europe actually mentioned the European Commission's Product Environmental Footprint, the PEF method, as one possible way to get everyone using the same ruler, so to speak.
Harmonization. We need credible ways to measure progress, otherwise the claims just feel empty.
So policy and standards are one side. But then there's the practical side. If mass balance is this technical bridge for the system, how does an individual company actually navigate using these new materials?
Good question. Let's zoom in from that big systemic view right down to a specific product. There was a really interesting case study from Novo Nordisk presented by Jesper Bruggeland.
Ah, yes. The healthcare company, that adds a whole other layer of complexity, doesn't it?
Totally. Because for them, patient safety trumps everything. They can't just slap a green label on something. The materials have to perform perfectly every time.
So what was their project?
They developed what they called an eco bottle. It's a small packaging component used for medical products, and they made it partly from bio-based plastic.
Okay, but in that context, highly regulated,
Hmm.
medical swapping materials can't be easy.
Not at all. Jesper explained they had incredibly strict standards to meet. Safety, obviously, but also stability over time, sterility, ensuring the plastic didn't react with the medicine, and even thinking about recyclability at the end.
A huge list of constraints.
And what I found fascinating was their sourcing strategy, because it seemed designed to head off public criticism from the get-go.
How so?
Novo Nordisk made a very deliberate choice to source the bio-based component from waste residues. Things left over from other processes. They explicitly avoided using food crops.
Sidestepping the whole food versus fuel or food versus materials debate. That's smart.
It immediately signals their thinking, their motives, doesn't it? It shows they consider the wider ethical implications.
Definitely. But getting it right wasn't just about picking the right feedstock. Jesper emphasized it needed intense cross-team collaboration. Engineers talking to sustainability experts, talking to the communications team, right from the very beginning. Everyone needed to be on the same page about why they were doing it, what the limitations were, how they'd talk about it.
That's such a key insight. Trust has to be built inside the company first. If the different departments aren't aligned or if they have different stories, the public will sense that inconsistency straight away.
Absolutely. And even though this was for medical supplies, where you might assume a high level of inherent trust, Novo Nordisk still prioritized transparency.
They talked openly to patients about it.
Yes, they explained the benefits, reduced fossil fuel use, but also the limitations. What percentage was bio-based? How would it be handled? That kind of open dialogue is crucial. It really builds that bridge to acceptance, doesn't it? Which leads us perfectly to the next piece, the public. What are actual citizens saying about all this? Well, Annie Simonson shared the findings from the B-Trust co-creation workshops. These brought together regular citizens and various stakeholders in places like Denmark and Belgium.
And what was the mood? Were people generally positive or skeptical?
It was really mixed, actually. Some people hear bio, and they're immediately positive, thinking it's greener, better. But there's also a significant chunk of people who are quite skeptical.
Why the skepticism? Past experiences.
Yeah, partly that. Concerns about greenwashing, companies making big promises that don't quite stack up. Again, confusion over the terminology really trips people up.
The biodegradable issue again.
That's a big one. People often think biodegradable means you can just toss it in your garden compost heap and it'll disappear.
When the reality for many industrially biodegradable plastics is they need very specific conditions, high heat, certain microbes found only in industrial composting facilities.
Exactly. So there's this gap between the technical definition and the public perception. It's fundamentally a communication challenge.
Okay, so feelings are mixed, language is tricky, but here's where I thought the workshops got really interesting. They identified different types of consumers, right? Based on their attitudes.
Yes, they came up with 4 distinct consumer personas. It's super useful because it shows you can't just have one single message. You need to tailor how you communicate.
All right, let's hear them. Who are these personas?
Okay, first you have the curious open. These folks are generally optimistic, they want to learn more, but they need clear facts and data to back up any claims.
Makes sense. Give them the evidence. Who's next?
Then there's the environmental optimist. They're sort of ready to embrace anything that sounds green. They tend to trust innovation and respond well to the vision of a sustainable future.
Okay, the early adopters, maybe?
Perhaps. Third is the resistant realist. Now, this group is much more skeptical, particularly of big companies. They need really strong, undeniable proof, often from third parties, and they want to see evidence of long-term positive impact, not just short-term gains.
Right, the show me, don't just tell me crowd. And the last one.
The cautious evaluator. They're interested, they see the potential, but they're also quite hesitant. They worry about unintended consequences like, what haven't we thought of yet? They need reassurance about risks and trade-offs.
4 very different mindsets. What connects them, though?
Yeah.
What did the workshops find drives trust or distrust across the board?
It really came down to understanding the motive. People want to know why a company is making this shift. Is it genuinely for environmental reasons, or is it just a marketing ploy? Is it about profit or planet?
Ah, the why behind the what.
Precisely. And that's why that co-creation approach, bringing citizens into the conversation early, is so important. It's not just about selling the science. It's about building mutual understanding and addressing those underlying concerns about motives.
It's about dialogue, not just a broadcast.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to perhaps the most, well, surprising finding from the whole Be Trust exercise, something that Susanne, Baden, Jørgensen, and Louisa really flagged up from the workshops.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What was the big surprise?
It was a fundamental knowledge gap. Turns out that many, maybe even most, of the workshop participants simply did not know that the vast majority of conventional plastics, the stuff we use every day, comes from fossil fuels, from oil.
Wait, really? People didn't know plastics are made from oil? That's quite staggering.
It surprised everyone involved, too. But think about the implications of that.
Well, yeah. If people don't even realize that the current baseline material is fossil-based.
Then the whole narrative about needing a transition to alternatives like bio-based materials just doesn't land with the same urgency, does it?
Yeah.
They don't grasp the core problem we're trying to solve, our dependence on finite, polluting fossil resources.
Wow. It means that anyone trying to promote bio-based alternatives is essentially trying to sell the solution before the audience fully understands the problem. The conversation needs to start much further back than we assumed.
It really does. It highlights a need for basic education about where everyday materials come from.
So the final takeaway then for innovators, for companies developing these new materials, what should they be focusing on?
It boils down to transparency, but a really deep kind of transparency. It's not just about shouting about the benefits. It's about being honest about the trade-offs, the limitations, the unknowns, and crucially, the why.
And actively listening to those different consumer types, the curious, the optimist, the realist, the evaluator.
Yes, engaging in genuine dialogue. Listening more than broadcasting. It requires a certain humility, admitting you don't have all the answers alongside the scientific expertise. It's as much about social science as material science.
So pulling all these threads together, what the Trust research really seems to show is that moving to bio-based materials isn't primarily a technical hurdle anymore. We have things like mass balance, the materials exist.
The bigger challenge is actually social and communicative. It's about perception, understanding, and ultimately trust.
Which is exactly what the Trust project aims to address. Just to remind listeners, it's funded by the EU under Horizon Europe, specifically to explore how co-creation and inclusive dialogue can build that trust for biotechnologies.
That's right. Because trust isn't something you can engineer in a lab alongside the plastic. It has to be built collaboratively. Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to mull over. If we genuinely want consumers, citizens, all of us, to get behind this massive shift away from fossil-based plastics, we can't just change the material itself.
We have to fundamentally change the conversation around it. Trust isn't built in isolation, it's built together.